So before we start, if I could just first of all establish some logistics. Is Mandy here? Where are you? Where are you hiding? Thank you. So there's materials that are available for the media. Where are those materials, please? Yeah, they need to be out here. Yeah. Bear with us, folks.
Can we do a volume check?
Sure you can. So testing 1, 2, 3. There's approximately 40 copies of hard copy materials for folks interested. I'm going to quickly take you through what's in the materials. I'm being assisted by Ms. Amanda Bird, a articling student in our office, who's delighted to be front and center this way. Just smile, Mandy. It'll all be over soon. Not yet. If you just bear with me for 1 second.
I'm Rob Ferguson, Vice President of Jeff.
Hi, Rob.
What we usually do, hi Julian, what we usually do is put materials. At this point, it's probably best if they could just be handed out from a corner instead of having us all walk up.
Yeah, that makes sense, but give me a minute to get organized and then I'll be happy to cooperate.
Right.
So Mandy, you're going to need to stay up here with me. Everything here. What's here, please? Yep. Mm-hmm. entrusting my business partner with the stack. So good afternoon. This press conference is being convened in order to permit Brad Blair and his spouse, Danielle Blair, to address the public, answer your questions, and give you information on next steps in terms of their journey in their search for accountability with the Government of Ontario. A number of different materials have been provided to you just to give you some guidance. First of all, you've been provided a copy of Mr. Blair's statement that he will be reading from shortly. Secondly, you've been provided a list of what we call suspect appointments plus other appointments that tell a very sad story about the very questionable appointments that have literally plagued this government. You've also been provided a copy of a summary of the statement of claim that represents the commencement of a lawsuit today, a $15 million lawsuit on behalf of the Blair family to seek accountability from the Government of Ontario for their treatment. You've also been provided, in addition to those things, a press release calling for a commission of inquiry. So with that, I'll commence the formal portion of this press conference. We're asking that the format of this be specifically, I'll provide some brief opening comments. I know you want to hear, of course, from former Deputy Commissioner Blair, and that's what's going to happen. And then you will also have an opportunity to ask questions of Mr. Blair, of Danielle, and of me as his legal counsel. Today, September 13th, 2019, a $15 million lawsuit was commenced. Wrongful termination, abuse of public office, breaches of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And in this over 50-page statement of claim, a very sad story is told about how the firing of Brad Blair simply represents the tip of the iceberg in terms of constant and repeated examples of utter contempt for protocol, for conflicts of interest, and for acting in the public interest by Premier Ford, his Chief of Staff, and other bureaucrats. The statement of claim that was filed today is the only way Brad Blair can push for accountability. What is exceedingly clear, given the utter failures of our legislative watchdogs, is that nothing short of a commission of inquiry convened under the Public Inquiries Act will actually give a full airing to the issues. Of course, we're all inquiry tired. The calling of an inquiry is a refrain that becomes at times boring. But if ever there was a case for one, it is now. You are faced with a premier who is implicated in umpteen numbers of tainted appointments, who is telling the people of Ontario that he's conducting a review to figure out if he did bad things. It is insulting to the intelligence of the people of Ontario that Premier Ford believes he can be trusted to do this work. So we are calling for a commission of inquiry with very little confidence that this government will do the right thing. The only way Brad Blair can continue a path insisting on accountability is a lawsuit and to pursue the matter before the divisional court. All of those I'm instructed to pursue aggressively and actively. Thank you. Mr. Blair?
Well, thank you, Julian, and thank you, everyone, for attending today. And thank you to my wife for being here to support me. On March 4th, 2019, Deputy Minister Di Tommaso abruptly, and in my opinion, unlawfully, ended my 33-year career with the Ontario Provincial Police. I have served the OPP faithfully and honorably since 1986, and due to my efforts in safeguarding the independence and credibility of the province's largest service from improper political interference, I was fired. My OPP career began on March 24th, 1986, with a posting to Red Lake. It was my dream to become an OPP officer. And I felt a debt of gratitude to the OPP and to the people of the province of Ontario for the opportunity to serve them. During my time in Red Lake, I was fortunate to work with some of the most dedicated officers I would interact with in my career. My coach officer was from Red Lake, and he taught me about the importance of public trust and how hard it is to earn and how easy it is to lose. He also taught me about the responsibility and the role that police officers play in their communities other than being law enforcers. Those are lessons that I carried with me throughout my career. It has always been important to me that the OPP be an institution that the people of Ontario trust to carry out its duties in a fair and impartial manner. On November 5th, 2018, I assumed command of the Ontario Provincial Police as the interim commissioner. I assumed command of the OPP as a result of an order in council proposed by the Premier of Ontario and supported by Cabinet. On that same day, I submitted my resume, indicating my intention to compete for the commissioner position on a full-time basis. As a result of having nearly 33 years of service with the OPP at that time, the last 5 years as the deputy commissioner, all I expected was to be given consideration to compete in a fair and transparent selection process. In assuming responsibility for Canada's second largest police service, even on an interim basis, I understood and accepted that I was solely responsible for maintaining the OPP's operational integrity, maintaining the public's trust, and ensuring the mistakes of the past were not repeated. During the month of November, I participated in the commissioner selection process. And as a result of that experience and my responsibility as commissioner, I challenged the Premier's public statements that the selection of Ron Taverner as the OPP commissioner was an independent process. I believe that I was duty-bound as commissioner to come forward. I believed at the time of coming forward that the OPP commissioner's process was the entire iceberg in terms of cronyism. But as the months passed and the numerous examples of further cronyism were identified, it became evident that the commissioner's process was the tip of the iceberg. I was fired on March 4th, 20 days shy of 33 years of service, for reasons that are still not clear to me. A firing that was unlawful and done without any due process. A firing that, if left unchallenged, puts every OPP officer at the risk of suffering the same fate. A firing that was done to silence me and dissuade me from seeking a response to allegations that I had made. Allegations that were made to the Ombudsman in writing and under oath to the Integrity Commissioner. To date, there are allegations that have yet to be investigated by either the Integrity Commissioner or the Ombudsman. Instead, those two legislative watchdogs have tossed the allegations back and forth, with neither taking responsibility for conducting a full investigation. It is a result of the systemic failure of these institutions to fulfill their mandates that a public inquiry into these matters is the only path forward to adequately address the serious issue of cronyism that hangs over this government and to restore the public's trust. The Integrity Commissioner report on the Commissioner selection process in March specifically identified the involvement of the Premier's office. In particular, it identified the actions of the Chief of Staff, Dean French, and the complicit actions of public servants. Yet nothing happened, and the cronyism continued. Eventually, numerous examples of cronyism led to the resignation of the Chief of Staff, and the only response has been that the Premier's office will conduct a review. An entity accused of wrongdoing itself is and investigating itself is not a hallmark of accountability or transparency, and it erodes public trust. I competed for the position of Commissioner of the OPP as a result of my sincere desire to continue to contribute to the safety of the people of Ontario and to continue to remain part of an organization that I love. For 33 years, the OPP was our family. And on March 4th, that was taken from us cruelly and without consideration of the impact it would have on me or my family. My wife Danielle is here with me and has been with me for 37 years, including the last 33 as my wife. At 19, that's right, 19, she married me and followed me to Red Lake and has stuck with me through the good and the bad. The spouses and partners and families of emergency service personnel are special people who pay a significant price in supporting their loved ones. My firing, without any due process or opportunity to defend myself, came as a shock to us. The impact of the firing has quite frankly traumatized me, my wife, and my family. We have been cut off from our OPP family and isolated from the organization we were dedicated to. We have suffered from social anxiety and have lost trust in the very institutions we have always respected. The past 6 months have been a time of grieving for us, dominated by overwhelming sadness that has permeated our daily lives. Taken from us was a natural transition to retirement that, in the best of circumstances, is difficult for a police officer. The retirement process provides closure and would have given me the opportunity to take stock of my contributions and reconcile the experiences that have shaped me. It is my belief that the retirement process is vitally important to the future mental health outcomes for police officers. Since my firing, we have received tremendous support from family and friends, old friends, and numerous OPP employees, retirees, as well as fellow officers from the province, the nation, and the United States have reached out to us in solidarity. I was approached recently by a retired police officer from London, England, who introduced himself and shook my hand, thanking me for my sacrifice to protect the profession of policing. And while support from fellow officers can be expected, considering the bond we share, the most surprising support has come from complete strangers who have sought me out to offer their support and to thank me for my courage. I do not expect that Premier Ford will do the right thing and hold a public inquiry into these matters. And that is why I call on the good people of the good people of the province to join me in demanding an inquiry be held. That the people of Ontario let their elected representatives know that this is not the way we expect our government to be run, using the government as a vehicle to appoint friends to positions of power and great financial gain.
Thank you, Brad. I have some comments to make about the legal proceedings that have been commenced, and then we'll open the floor for questions. Firstly, in terms of the documents you've been provided, there's a screen to my left that is scrolling. There is a document called Appointments and Issue among the 6 documents you've provided. If you flip to it for a moment, please. It's called Appointments and Issue. You will see that first there is a section called Suspect Appointments. All egregious cases that are simply embarrassing by virtue of appointments of family members, close friends, abandonment of process by the Government of Ontario. These people have either been fired, have resigned, or stay in power, continuing to purport to exercise public powers while serious issues exist regarding public trust. The second category, and please note that among these 8 is the current Deputy Minister, number 8, page 3. The circumstances surrounding his appointment, the ushering out of the former Deputy Minister, the clearing of the way for Ron Taverner, within 2 days of De Tomaso's appointment, magically the qualifications for the Commissioner of the OPP are watered down so that magically Mr. Taverner qualifies. All of that is a matter of record. The exceptional elevation of an individual who never rose above the rank of staff superintendent to the top bureaucrat of policing stands as brand new. At page 4 of that same document, 3 suspect departures, terminations of high-ranking public officials, all stand as question marks. Matthew Turigian, in the Integrity Commissioner's report, he quotes Orsini as feeling pressured to make one of the Ford family friends the head of the OPP. The same Orsini who utterly disavows any claims that this was an independent process. You know, the claims by the Premier, by Minister Jones, in the House, to the people of Ontario, that this was an independent process. What little regard these public officials must have for our intelligence. Matthew Turigian, Steve Orsini, Brad Blair, strange departures and terminations, all begging more questions than they answer. Page 6. The title is Other Notable Ford Ties. These appointments all beg more questions than answers. Who do we rely upon to restore trust? How many other appointments are currently exercising public powers or important powers as a result of problematic relationships, personally or otherwise, with the Fords? The scrolling list is the iceberg. We just don't know how deep it runs. But the assurances you have been given is not to worry. You may take comfort. Premier Ford is on the case. He is going to faithfully investigate Premier Ford. How little regard must they have for our intelligence? At what stage does this exercise simply become a mockery? There is no way of telling how deep this runs without an effective mechanism for accountability. It is true that Justice Wake's report, the Integrity Commissioner's report, makes important findings with absolutely no consequences for the public officials involved. That is, not one public official, other than being named in the report, has suffered any consequences as a result of the damning observations in the report, prompting our Premier to do a victory lap with the issuance of Justice Wake's report.
He's been cleared, claimed Ford. And how could you blame him? Not a single consequence for a single public official flowing from the Integrity Commissioner's report. But Keystone Cop number 1 isn't the end of it. Keystone Cop number 2 is our ombudsman. With literal blinders in front of his eyes, he fails to investigate any actions of any bureaucrat, pointing to the fact that this is all about the actions of politicians. Need I remind you who Mr. Orsini is, who Mr. French is? These are not politicians. These are powerful political figures who exercise powers entrusted to them by the people of Ontario that the Ombudsman is obligated to investigate but has failed to do so. Our legislative watchdogs have turned into toothless accountability mechanisms, and it lies to a commission of inquiry to fix this. The statement of claim is a document that you have been provided in short form. That is, it is a 53-page claim. We've provided you the summary plus the first 7 pages, the overview. So you should have a summary, document marked summary, with the opening 7 pages of the claim. Do people have that? Should be a document with a seal on it. It says summary of claim. And then the first 7 pages of the claim that was issued today is provided to you. It includes an overview. At page 5 of the claim, which has been provided to you, and copies of this have been provided today to Her Majesty the Queen and anyone else named that we could find. So in other words, they've had notice. Page 5, under overview, may I read to you what the Integrity Commissioner stated about what the Premier and the Minister, Minister Jones, claimed was an independent process. I'm reading from page 5 of that document that is under summary. Go to page 5. There seemed to be tacit acknowledgement by the Secretary Orsini that Mr. French was rooting for Mr. Taverner's success. This is what the Integrity Commissioner says in his report with no consequence. Anyone examining these messages, text between Orsini and French, would have serious doubts as to the fairness of the process to the other candidates. Please understand, this is not a lawsuit simply about a disgruntled, unsuccessful candidate. Appreciate the ramifications. If the Integrity Commissioner is right, that the hiring process was indeed rigged. Rigged is my word. He's more polite. If he's right that the result was rigged, the effort was to rig the appointment of the leader of the second largest police service in the country. The effort was to rig the hiring of a police service by appointing a friend, including reducing the qualifications so the friend qualified, all with the objective of the Premier having at his disposal the Ontario Provincial Police. The ramifications for us as a democracy are profound. And for the Integrity Commissioner to take no steps in consequence of these findings, for the Ombudsman to refuse to investigate, makes their roles as legislative watchdogs shams. That is why we call for a commission of inquiry. That is why this lawsuit is as broad as it is. It's not simply a wrongful termination. It's about abuse of power. Thank you. we'll take any questions you have.
Mr. Blair, this has been going on obviously for quite some time. Why are you now speaking to us and taking questions and talking about this? Why now?
Well, as I stated in my statement, this has been very traumatic for me and my family, and we needed some separation from this issue, some time to collect ourselves, some time to give some thought to what our next steps would be, and to, quite frankly, rebuild our strength. My focus was on my family, and when we were strong enough, we decided it was time to come forward to seek accountability.
The Premier has obviously stated, as you know, that this was a situation of sour grapes, that you were upset that you did not get the job. How do you respond to that?
It's tough to lose a competition that you were never available to win. I was never going to be a winner, so it's hard to lose something you could never win.
I'm sure you have an idea why you were fired. Can you tell us what that is?
I actually don't have a concrete belief in terms of why I was fired. I've never been given an opportunity to respond to allegations.
How were you told? Can you tell us about the day you were told, sir?
Sure, March 4th, this past March 4th, 2019, at GHQ headquarters in Aurelia, Deputy Minister D. Tomaso was waiting in Interim Commissioner Gary Couture's office for me to arrive. And I was summoned to the office and brought in and sat down, and I was subsequently terminated.
And I want to be clear, this is the same D. Tomaso who was the subject of the complaint by Blair. He personally oversaw the firing. This government has no concept of conflict of interest. High school students could have figured out he should have been distant from this process. Sorry, go ahead, there's questions.
Deputy Commissioner Blair, I was just going to ask, you were fired, so was there any severance or anything like that for your many years of service, or were you just cut loose and got your final paycheck?
So I was cut loose, got my final paycheck. Of course, I receive a pension. I attempted to defer that pension, but I have no choice. That's the way the rules work. My severance was withheld from me, and a significant number of vacation days that I forfeited as a result of not being able to take my vacation because of my work, specifically the Pan Am Parapan Games. I did not take vacation that summer, and therefore I banked vacation. That has been withheld from me also.
So how many weeks vacation would that be?
It'd
And
be-
how much severance would you have foregone?
It had been 26 weeks of severance is our entitlement, and it's 88 vacation days.
Mr. Blair,
And sorry, can I just follow
Go ahead,
up?
Rob.
Is
Oh, yeah.
Is your pension unreduced, or is it a full pension?
I was at full pension.
Okay.
perhaps this is a question for Mr. Faulkner, but there's obviously, in the timeline of events with statements of claim in the past and the previous legal actions that have happened in the past, can you just go over why there's now, why the decision to go now to a $15 million claim on top of the previous statements of claims that have been made in previous legal actions? Can you just go over
Sure.
that?
So you don't have the full claim. We planned on having data sticks available. I'm not clear whether they are. There should be any minute coming in here so that you have, we have an index of various legal proceedings that have been filed. We wanted to be helpful, so we've included all of them on a data stick for you. I expect that to be forthcoming. Paragraph 150 of the claim that was issued today proposes that this action that was issued today be heard together with the other court file, which is the libel action against Premier Ford. For the sake of clarity, once the Premier went public claiming that my client was in breach of the Police Services Act, the clock started ticking on under the Libel and Slander Act on the time he is permitted as a plaintiff to exercise his rights under the libel laws. That's a very discrete form of legal proceeding. In other words, suing the Premier for that specific libel. It doesn't address the broader wrongful termination, abuse of power issues that flow from this case. That's why two sets of proceedings. It's annoying. I'm a lawyer and I hate it. But we propose to have them heard together. It is important and it's noteworthy that every time a police officer is alleged to breach the Police Services Act, they are the subject of an investigation and a charge under the Police Services Act. That's how our democracy operates. When you've got peace officers, there is a set of rules. In 30 years, I have never seen or experienced public allegations of breaches of the act against a police officer by a public official that were not accompanied by any investigation whatsoever. That is not a single police officer in professional standards departments across this province would pick up the torch that the Premier was obviously trying to hand to someone to get them to prosecute Mr. Blair. Not a single professional standards officer agreed with the Premier. What happened? The Premier and his bureaucrats, who are sworn to be loyal to him, bypassed the Police Services Act and engaged in this bizarre summary process. This is what should interest everybody. They claimed to us, and it's not because he was deputy commissioner. It's not because there was an order in council. They claimed to us that every member of the OPP is a public servant under the Public Service Act, and therefore they can terminate pursuant to this bizarre Public Service Commission that is laughable in terms of its conflict of interest rules. Example, Deputy Minister Boniferro, the Deputy Attorney General, who sat on the hiring panel of Taverner, sits on the Services Commission. Di Tommaso, clearly implicated in these complaints, has a private meeting with them, and then they fire him. If they're right that every OPP officer who is a public servant under this act can be fired this way, then I just need everybody to know that that's 5,000 to 7,000 police officers who should now wonder about stepping out of line with this Premier and these bureaucrats.
Prior to going public.
That was a longer answer than you wanted. Sorry.
Prior to going public and with this legal challenge, can you talk a little bit about what happened behind the scenes, kind of following, the hiring of Mr. Taverner and all that? Were there attempts to, for instance, address this issue behind the scenes?
With, by me? To who? With who?
I mean, just kind of addressing it with whoever, following the hiring of Mr. Taverner and prior to making this public. And
Well, I think that was the problem, that the people that I would typically go to. I was the commissioner of the OPP, so let's make that clear. I was responsible for the organization. The commissioner of the OPP is an independent entity from government. And the commissioner of the OPP, in circumstances like that, has no police services board. And by the way, I think the Ontario Provincial Police may now be the only police service in Canada that doesn't have a police services board. And so I had no one to go to as the deputy minister, who I would normally report to administratively, was involved in the process. My other option would have been the deputy minister of the Attorney General. He too was involved in the process. I was stuck on an island by myself as the commissioner of the OPP with my conscience, and to do the right thing.
Mrs. Blair, you're obviously here next to your husband, and he talked about how this is, used a very strong word, traumatizing, or traumatized the family. Could you speak about what this has been like for you and for Mr. Blair?
I'll do my best, given the circumstances of not being in these circles very often. But I can't say it's been anything short of traumatizing. It's, I would say it's had a life-changing impact on us. If you ever think about how you kind of conduct your life and the things that you believe and the things that you hold dear, and then feeling like somebody's kicked a stool out from underneath of you, you kind of lose your bearings a little bit. It's been difficult for our entire family. I've been with Brad 37 years. We've moved across this province 4 times in the service of the OPP and the citizens of Ontario. He's put his life on the line. He's put his well-being on the line many times. But if there's one thing he's always done the right thing. The right thing is not always the easy thing, and this is certainly not easy for any of us. But we're together and we're strong. We have a great support network. And he's done the right thing. And I believe in him. And I just think that I'm just very proud of him.
Because there are multiple processes in place now, someone who doesn't really follow so much of this may have a hard time understanding exactly what's going on. Could you just explain exactly what a commission of inquiry is, who's involved, who carries it out, what it entails?
So, first of all, one of the things we provided to you, and I'm sorry about 6 sets of documents, but I felt like these questions were coming and I wanted to get it right. I have an extraordinary team, whether it's my business partner, Miss James over there, or Miss Bird over there, the articling student, and the rest. I have an extraordinary team that's worked hard to try to keep you folks informed. And included in these materials is a timeline. So the backgrounder and timeline. It's a 6-page timeline. That's ridiculous, but that's how far back it dates, and it's complicated. What I would tell you is it commenced with the ombudsman's complaint, all right, by way of process. So you will see the timeline referring to the ombudsman's complaint, and following the Tavener appointment, the complaint was laid by then Acting Commissioner Blair, exercising his powers as the lead of the OPP out of a concern to protect the integrity of the OPP. What's fascinating is the response. Please don't forget the response. It matters. Is for then Minister Jones, she's still the minister, to rise in the House and say that Tavener was chosen independently by an independent commission. Do you remember those words? Independent panel. Premier Ford echoed those same words. Now take a look under overview for the quote from the Integrity Commissioner's report. Take a look at how the Premier's Chief of Staff was exhorting Orsini. Take a look at the reality that Orsini sat on the hiring panel. Orsini writes that this was anything but independent. He wrote that. So the Premier and the Minister lied to the people of Ontario. This was not independent. And the next step was an exposure of that. In other words, you ask me what were the proceedings. Well, the next step was the complaint, including the revelations about efforts to interfere in how the OPP provides security. The request that the OPP keep the costs for the Premier's van off the books. What happened after that was that the Premier went on a public rant attacking the integrity of Mr. Blair, and then the Ombudsman ducked. He ducked. The Integrity Commissioner, pursuant to complaints lodged by the NDP, because please understand Mr. Blair cannot lodge a complaint, pursued the matter in front of the Integrity Commissioner with the result of a report with no consequences. What a great office to have. You can do a study, you can find a whole bunch of stuff, bad stuff about what people did, and there's not a single solitary consequence for the misconduct that's been identified. So the next process was to continue the divisional court matter before the courts in order to give guidance to the Ombudsman. It was at that time that Mr. Blair filed an application record that contained the substance that supported his complaint. He was then summarily fired.
How did you arrive at the $15 million number? And is each person named in the lawsuit being sued individually for that number, sir?
Negative. So the $15 million reflects the assessment by our office of the extent of the damages, both in the form of damages due and owing for what the legal system calls professional capital punishment, because that's what this is, right? You take a 32-year career and you flush it down in the toilet. Instead of being recognized for his service, it's flushed down the toilet. The Ontario Court of Appeal in a libel case formerly involving former Justice Casey Hill, as a Crown attorney, awarded $10 million in terms of how he was libeled. It's very difficult to put a final number on it. What I can tell you is the punitive damages are substantial. That is the claim for punitives,
Punitives are all about expressing society's condemnation for the actions of the defendants. That, combined with the wrongful termination and the abuse of power and the Family Law Act claims you've heard from Danielle today. You've heard how it affects his family. All of that leads to the $15 million figure.
Are you looking for a specific amount out of the premier, like how much from each person?
So if you look at, and it's in the documents you have, you know, there's a summary. The amounts allocated are spelled out. The short answer to your question is no. At this stage, they're not itemized per person. It's in terms of a claim, this would be the standard way it's set out. You set out the global figures you're looking for. You set out the basis, that is, the heads of damages you're looking for, and you name the people and their actions. And over time, it gets particularized.
What did you think the first time you saw Ron Tavener's name come across your desk as regards the head of the OPP? What did you think, sir?
What did I think?
Yes.
When I was told?
Yes.
I didn't know what to think. I was involved in a competition that I thought was fairly ran.
You think he was qualified for that position?
I'm not going to comment. This isn't about Ron Tavener for me. This is about the process.
I do want to intervene, though, to be honest with you about something, because this is where my client and I part ways just a little bit. There's a notion of being unqualified. There's a notion of being unqualified. This is not personal to Ron Tavener, all right, in this sense. This isn't about a personal attack on his integrity or him as a person. The allegations are that upon clearing the way for Deputy Minister DiTommaso to take over, within 48 hours of him assuming office, magically, the qualifications for the commissioner of the OPP were watered down so that Ron Tavener qualified. Prior to that act of watering down the qualifications, he did not qualify. We say that was done specifically for the purpose of clearing the way for him. And if that's true, then the competition is a sham. The process was not independent as promised by the Premier and the Minister, and therefore the right rules, had they been followed, and had it been fairly done, Ron Tavener would have not been qualified to fill the position. Why? Because staff superintendents don't generally take over as commissioners of the country's second largest police service. It's unprecedented. So the short answer to your question is, the lawyer is explaining why the term unqualified is there. Because if the rules had been followed, and if it had not been rigged, he wouldn't have qualified. He qualified because DiTommaso watered it down. And he watered it down to get Tavener in. That's what we say legally, and that's what we stand by.
Your wife spoke quite eloquently about the emotional impact that this has had on you, on your family. Could you, I know you addressed it a bit in your statement, but could you just tell me how the firing in particular, after 33 years as an OPP officer, how did it feel?
I guess I'll take it back and relate it to a previous life experience. I lost my father at the age of 21 to cancer. And if you've ever lost a parent, you'll know the incredible amount of sadness and loss that you feel. That's how I would compare it. That's what it feels like to me. The OPP was my family. I have worked from Windsor to Ottawa, from Fort Erie to Fort Severn, and every place in between. I gave my life. I sacrificed time from my family and from my children to do my job. And even when I was home, I wasn't always present because I was available 24/7 to support the organization and what we were trying to do in terms of providing public safety to this province. And that was taken from me.
This gentleman had a question, so I'm sorry, I talked over you. I apologize.
Can I ask, the Premier has repeatedly stressed that he has the power to appoint anybody he so chooses to whatever position. And we saw with Thomas Creek that they didn't go through the same process of interviewing the potential candidates. It was just kind of fly-by-night, and there he was. What is so different from the Premier appointing Thomas Creek versus appointing Ron Tavener?
So I want to emphasize, first of all, very good question.
I'll try to give you a very good answer. The difference between lies and truth, all right? The difference between opaque and transparent. So they lied about trying to get their buddy in. They told the truth about putting Karik in. That's the difference between a utter public loss of confidence and public trust. Mr. Karik has a top reputation. What, to be honest, Brad Blair did by sacrificing his professional life was to ensure that a competent person, pursuant to a competent process, was put in place. It's the difference between lies and truth.
At the end of the entire process, though, did the Premier still not have the power to appoint whomever he chose to that position?
So if the Premier lies to the people of Ontario about a process, and his chief of staff, who sits shoulder to shoulder late at night in the office, takes personal instruction from him, lies about the process, please don't tell me later it made no difference. How can you lie about creating the leader of the second largest police service in the country, a person, that is Taverner, who just happens to be your loyal, longtime friend, and someone tell me no harm, no foul? I utterly can't accept that that's how we run a democracy. And in fact, so we're clear, if that's how we run a democracy, it won't be a democracy for very long. So that's the difference. The difference is there was an effort to pull the wool over the eyes of the people of Ontario. Look at the scrolling list. Taverner is a tip of the iceberg. Now look at the list. You know, why don't you say that for every single person on this list? We created to you suspect appointments list. Why don't you say that for every one of them? Why don't you say it about Ms. Powell, French's niece? Why don't you say it about the way this government has chosen to use the Public Accountants Council to make appointments? What this is about is not whether somebody is qualified, not qualified, a good person. It's whether you lie. It's whether you're furtive. It's whether you have a complete, utter, reckless disregard for process. These are top officials entrusted with huge resources. If they are lying and cheating, the consequences are interminable. And we don't know how deep it runs. We still don't. And everyone can take comfort. Everyone can take comfort because Doug Ford's on it. He'll report back to us about how much Doug Ford lied and cheated. It's ridiculous.
Mr. Falconer, do you find it, or should I ask you, like, we've been asking the government for weeks and months about details of this public appointments review process and really don't get any answers back. What do you take from that?
Commission of Inquiry, independence. We don't have legislative watchdogs with the capacity or the will to do their job. The Integrity Commissioner had his chance. He issued an important report. It just has absolutely no consequences. Premier Ford thought it was a win. The Ombudsman, well, he just ducked. So in view of what amounts to, respectfully, Keystone Cops as our legislative watchdogs, a commission of inquiry is the only answer, because it is a transparent public process in which, example, Secretary Orsini would be under oath, explaining to us why he resigned the same day, the exact same day that the Premier submitted a letter to the Integrity Commissioner saying, for corroboration on this, please look to Mr. Orsini. Mr. Orsini said, nobody here but us chickens, and literally announced his retirement the same day. This is a mockery. I'm not making this stuff up. You can't. So we don't know how deep it runs. So how do you solve that? How do you address that? Well, you don't turn to the guy in charge who's orchestrating it, the Premier, and ask him to solve it, right?
Mr. Blair, have you ever had a conversation with the Premier about any of this at all?
No, I've never met the Premier.
If you had the opportunity to speak with him or ask him a question, what would you say?
About
this whole process, about why you were passed over, about why Ron Taverner was appointed, about why you got fired?
my question would be, and it would be broader than just the Premier, it would be also to the Cabinet, is how did any of them think that appointing the friend of the Premier to the Commissioner of the OPP was a good idea? How did not one person, because I'm told in terms of listening to what the Premier had said that it was unanimous. How did not any of them stand up and say, hey, listen, this is not a good idea. This is not a good idea in terms of the public's trust in the operational integrity of the OPP. You know, it could have been Sir Robert Peel, the father of policing, and he can't be the commissioner of the OPP if he's the friend of the Premier. It just doesn't work that way. The OPP is an entity that needs to be, has its operational integrity. The public needs to see that it is separate from the government, that it operates independently from the government. The OPP investigates the government.
Was that a concern that you had personally as well, as the interim commissioner of the OPP, that somebody who has, you know, long-standing links to the Ford family was named as the OPP commissioner? Did you worry about interference, about independence?
Obviously, you'd worry about that. And it's not whether or not the conflict would be real, it's whether or not it's perceived. And the impact to the OPP officers who out there day after day do their jobs. The OPP already struggles with the stigma that we are an extension of government. I've heard it my entire career. You're just collecting money for the government. I pay your salary, right? That's what the OPP deals with on a daily basis because of our name, the Ontario Provincial Police. We are a separate, independent, operational entity who has to, and from time to time, and you're well aware, we investigate government. And we do it very well. We are independent. We are not servants. We are not agents of the government. And that is the requirement that has to maintain public trust. The public, so what plays out if that does not occur? Public loses its trust in the OPP officers. So when an OPP officer stops a car on the side of the road and the public's now interacting because they don't trust the officer and they're making comment. So that increases the propensity for complaints against officer. It could increase the amount of physical altercations that could occur. And more importantly, victims of crime may not trust us and may not come forward. And who suffers? We all suffer. Our communities suffer because they don't trust the police. And you can go back in history and the role the police have played, whether it's with the 60 scoop, whether it's with residential school, we have a history. And we are not trusted in certain communities because of the role that we played. And we work very hard on a day-to-day basis to show the people of Ontario that we are independent. And we will do our jobs without government interference.
Mr. Blair, at the heart of your libel defamation suit against the Premier is his suggestion or implication in his comments that he made that you breached the Police Services Act by releasing the material that you did in early December about the camper van and about the security detail and those kinds of things. How was what you did not violating your oath as a police officer? How was this not a violation of the Police Services Act?
First of all, it's very important to appreciate the sequence of events. The Premier's comments about violating the Police Services Act actually predate the filings. So that can't be what he meant. That is, his claims about violating the Police Services Act were before the filing an issue. You need to know that.
The December 11th letter to the Ombudsman contained, that's when we all started reporting.
The Premier started making public comments about being in violation of the Act before that. Absolutely before that, number one. Number two, you need to know, I, on behalf of my client, wrote repeated letters inquiring as to what he was referring to and asking to be apprised if there was an investigation of my client, given the ramifications for the Premier of this province declaring that a police officer, any officer in this province, is in violation of the Police Services Act. It's unprecedented. So I wrote letter after letter, not just to the Premier, but to the Attorney General, asking what they meant. So you're tying it to something that has been fabricated after the fact. And I want to add to that, because it's important to appreciate this. The documents in issue were filed in February. They were filed in February, of this year, and sat in the court for 10 days. We didn't provide them to the media at all. These documents were filed in court, and they were filed in support of the Ombudsman Divisional Court application. They sat in the court system for 10 days. At the same time they were filed, so day number one, a copy was provided to the Ministry of the Attorney General, to the Attorney General's office. They took no steps to raise a red flag about what was in the documents. They took no steps to seal up the documents. 10 days went by before members of the media accessed the court file. It's completely disingenuous to suggest that Brad Blair was fired because of a court filing. It's the same, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Faulkner, I'm referring to the December 11th letter that Mr. Blair wrote to, at that time, Commissioner Blair wrote to the Ombudsman, which was released publicly.
That's not the court filings, that's not what they're talking about.
That's not in the court filings, but Premier Ford's claims that are starting to raise the questions about whether there were violations of the Police Services Act. We're referring to that December 11th letter, which contained information about the camper van and about the request for security detail. I know this because we all reported about that in early December, and the Premier's comments came later in December and in January. So
prior to any court
the
filings.
question is, I guess, that Ombudsman's letter specifically, the material contained in the letter to the Ombudsman, revealing things about the operational stuff that only Mr. Blair could have access to, revealing that publicly. How is that not a violation of the Police Services Act?
That's absolutely not what his boss, Di Tommaso, alleged in a letter to him. In other words, Di Tommaso writes him and says, I'm not taking any disciplinary action on you. I'm not alleging that you've done anything wrong yet. I'm putting you on notice. And the bureaucrats who fire him in February say that it was fired as a result of the court filings. So you need to understand that the story doesn't hang together. The reason a public inquiry is so important, that the left hand absolutely doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And I can assure you, the minute the Premier started making these comments, we asked for information as to what exactly he was saying. The fact of a letter to the Ombudsman in the context that it was provided isn't relied upon to fire him. That isn't why they say it.
Just to clarify, we're not talking necessarily about the interpretation of the Ford, of what the Premier said or what the Tommaso said. We're talking about that specific action
of the letter. No, it's absolutely not. It's not a violation of the act, and it was his duty as the commissioner of the OPP to protect the OPP. And the complaint, I repeat, the complaint does not represent any violation of any act. He is drawing to the attention of the appropriate authority that an investigation needs to take place. And I need you to know that he was not advised at any point in writing by anybody that that letter constitute a violation of the law, because it doesn't. It simply doesn't. If the commissioner of the OPP cannot draw to the attention of the primary watchdog in charge of investigating government wrongdoing, the nature of the wrongdoing. Remember, the letter does not release documents. It spells out the allegations. If the commissioner of the OPP, in his discretion, can't act to protect the institution, what you're telling me is his hands would be tied. And it's not a secret process. It's important. It's important that it's a public process. And there was nothing provided in that letter that would have compromised anything. Please don't tell me that a special chair for his Blu-ray VCR in his van compromised the public safety of Ontario. It's absurd. What it did is it embarrassed the Premier. And the reason this man got fired was for embarrassing the Premier, for scuttling the Premier's plan to put Taverner in charge. How do you separate the fact that the Premier abandons putting Taverner in place within days of this man's firing? I mean, give me a break. Again, how little regard for the intelligence of the people of Ontario does this government have?
Can I ask about that van? One of the allegations that the Premier's office and Mr. French have denied explicitly is the phrase off the books, illegal off the books. And I haven't seen where that comes from, what the basis of that is. Is that an email? Is that an oral conversation that you had with somebody? Can you walk us through where that, not just the van, but the fact that it was meant to be secret or off the books or illegal?
All right, so I'm just stopping you there to only indicate to you that the data stick we've brought today includes the application record, all right, in the divisional court with the documents you're asking about. I just want you to make sure you get the data stick because it's got that information there. It was filed in divisional court. Go ahead, Brad.
So I stand by the information that was provided to me by the senior officers within the OPP. I stand by them and what they said. I stand by the documents that I filed with the divisional court, and I was transparent in bringing that information forward.
So that was information you got from senior officers who had conversations
In every
with-
case, I did not solicit information. That information came to me in the course of my duty as the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police.
and
It was brought to me by officers with significant concerns.
And the short answer to your question is yes, that's right. The information came to him
not
through
to
senior
you
officers.
directly, but to the senior officers.
That's
who
correct.
then relayed it to you.
Yes.
Mr. Blair, would you like to return to policing in any capacity?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, I would. I look forward and I wish to return to the OPP and wear my uniform once again, and to go through the process at some point and retire with dignity.
Is that the end game here? Yeah, I mean, ultimately, beyond all the lawsuits and everything, you would like your position back?
That is one of my wishes. The rest I leave to my legal counsel.
What is the status of that Public Service Board grievance to get your job back? Where does that stand now?
There is some Byzantine process for appealing it to a board, and what I can tell you is the dates and the processes that have been erected to deal with this matter convince us all that the lawsuit's the right direction, that process is not going to bring any meaningful result by way of justice. In fact, it's a troubling, very strange process.
Mr. Blair, on that van the Premier was looking for, what troubled you the most about that request from the Premier's office?
Well, I think it stood as an example of many things that I had highlighted about the Premier's office attempting to direct the operational activities of the Ontario Provincial Police. That was the gist of my complaint, that their direction was going to interfere with the operational integrity of the OPP, erode public trust, and, quite frankly, was traveling down a road to repeat mistakes of the past that are very well documented, that I myself understand very well.
Do you ever speak to the Premier through this whole process? Do you ever have a conversation with him?
I've never spoken to the Premier. I've never spoken to the Minister. I was the Commissioner for 6 weeks. I never met or spoke with the Minister one time.
Mr. Blair, in any of these circumstances, do you believe that anything criminal was done?
All I can say is I've asked for an investigation. I've continued to ask for an investigation. I've spent our personal funds to push for an investigation. I've been transparent about my willingness to provide evidence in any manner, in any forum that is made available to me, to be transparent and honest and provide the detail. Investigations aren't always there to find guilt or blame certain people. It's there to clear the air, to bring out the truth. And to date, no one has agreed to conduct any investigations, and certainly I was not going to be directing an investigation take place. We, the OPP, were going to be witnesses. So that would have been an abuse of authority by me to direct OPP officers to investigate. I went the normal route to find the bodies that were the watchdogs whose mandate it is to investigate these things. That's all I've asked for.
And I want to, on the issue of the van, I want to draw it to your attention, and it's reflected in the timeline, that Mr. Blair testified before the Integrity Commissioner. I brought to the attention of the Integrity Commissioner that information with respect to this request or direction to keep it off the books was something that Mr. Blair had file records on, and he would be happy upon the direction of the Integrity Commissioner to provide him that information. Not a peep. We didn't hear from the Integrity Commissioner again. In his report, he says, well, it's outside my scope. I don't know. An allegation that the Premier and or his Chief of Staff are looking to have his van souped up and to keep it off the books doesn't sound like a private benefit to the politician who's the subject of the investigation in the first place. It's bizarre. It's why I say there's a serious question as to the failure of our legislative watchdogs, to the point that you should have no faith in their ability to continue to do this work. And there needs to be a clearing of the air, because we honestly don't know how deep the iceberg goes. I mean, can anybody here give me any assurance that the 8 suspect appointments identified are the only ones that are a problem? Like, how do you know how much deeper it runs? What else did French do? What did Orsini do? We don't have any way of knowing that. And there didn't seem to be an overriding interest in getting past that, getting to that. Any other questions?
Mr. Blair, this has been going on for almost a year now. Just reflecting back on past 10 months or so, is there anything you regret or anything you would have done differently?
You know, it's in the documents. I was not supposed to be the interim commissioner of the OPP. Gary Couture had been named interim commissioner by Commissioner Hawks at the time and Deputy Minister Turigian. And the Premier's office stepped in and overturned that and said they didn't have the authority to make that decision and asked that I be put in as interim commissioner. A responsibility I took seriously. In hindsight, I wish I never would have agreed to that. And the decision to put Gary in and not me was one based on fairness. That Matt Turigian and Vince Hawks did not think that it would be fair to the other competitors that if me, the only deputy commissioner from the OPP, was going to compete for commissioner, was going to be in the spot acting. They thought that was an unfair advantage. And that's why they did not ask me to act, and I was perfectly fine with that. I thought that was fair. And quite frankly, I had enough work to do and enough things to focus on. Competing for the commission of the OPP is a huge commitment. It was a commitment I took away from my family. It took me an entire weekend to write my resume, let alone all the preparation that I had to do, only to find out the process was fraudulent. And I never had a chance of winning. So I regret accepting the interim commissioner position, because I would not be here in front of you today had I said no. But I thought it was my obligation, and I thought, quite frankly, I couldn't say no. So I agreed to do it. And had I not, I most likely would have brought the evidence that I had that was brought to me as a deputy commissioner. I'd have taken it to the interim commissioner at the time and said, here's what I have. You're the commissioner. This is your issue. But I was the commissioner. And so I regret taking that position.
Do you have any sons or daughters that are in the police?
Well, my son is a civilian who's on a contract. A contract. He's been on a contract for 2 years. He's not a full-time employee.
Danielle, can we ask, is your last name Blair also?
Yes.
Is that D-A-N-I-E-L-L-E?
Yeah, the front of the statement of claims, so there's a document of the 6 documents, and it starts with summary of lawsuit. If you look at summary of lawsuit, the second page is actually the named plaintiffs. So,
Thank you.
and I believe Ms. Dashambu's now here, or I saw her here, with the data sticks, is that right? And how many data sticks do we have? We have almost 40 data sticks. Aren't we helpful lawyers? So the documents that we referred to and the full statement of claim and the full application records that were in divisional court, all of these are on the data sticks. There's an index at the front of the data sticks to make the paper readily available to you. With that, we want to thank you for attending today and for your questions. We're going to be departing. It is not Mr. Blair's intention to do scrums in the hallway, so nobody intends to be rude, but we'll be, Danielle and Brad will be on their way out. All right, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for tolerating me, Rob.